Good morning. The scripture reading today is Luke chapter 21, verses 5 through 36, which can be found on page 1603 of the Pew Bible. Some of his disciples were remarking about how the temple was adorned with beautiful stones and with gifts dedicated to God. But Jesus said, "As for what you see here, the time will come when not one stone will be left on another. Every one of them will be thrown down." "Teacher," they asked, "when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are about to take place?" He replied, "Watch out that you are not deceived. For many will come in my name, claiming, 'I am he,' and 'the time is near.' Do not follow them. When you hear of wars and uprisings, do not be frightened. These things must happen first, but the end will not come right away." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences in various places, and fearful events and great signs from heaven. But before all this, they will seize you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and put you in prison, and you will be brought before kings and governors, and all on account of my name. And so you will bear testimony to me. But make up your mind not to worry beforehand how you will defend yourselves. For I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents, brothers and sisters, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but not a hair of your head will perish. Stand firm and you will win life. When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. For this is the time of punishment and fulfillment of all that has been written. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. There will be great distress in the land and wrath against this people. They will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. People will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world, for the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. When these things begin to take place, stand up and lift your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." He told them this parable. "Look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that the kingdom of God is near. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Be careful, or your hearts will be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and the anxieties of life, and that day will close on you suddenly like a trap. For it will come on all those who live on the face of the whole earth. Be always on the watch, and pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen, and that you may be able to stand before the Son of Man."
I want to kind of jump in quick with a little exercise that might be a little too real for people, a little too quick, but let's try it, okay? We are at church after all. We're not supposed to be playing games. So raise your hand or stand up, depending on how much this is true or how much you want to participate physically in this. If you have ever been let down in your life, just ever in your life you've been let down, okay? Or raise your hand or stand up if anybody has ever not kept their word. Like they've said something to you, they said something was going to happen, they said they were going to do something, and they didn't do it. They said they loved you, and they didn't fight for your relationship. They said they would marry you, but they didn't stay with you. They said that they would fight their demons so that this tragic thing in their personality wouldn't ultimately destroy your relationship with them or their life with you or whatever, and they didn't do it. They gave up, right? Okay. You can go ahead and be seated. Put your hands down. What does that have to do with this passage, right? One of the things that we recognize, maybe as much as almost any time in the history of human beings, there are more words maybe than there have ever been. And words seem to mean less maybe than they've ever meant. If there's one thing that passes away, it's human words. I mean, we forget things that we say like the moment they're off our lips. And the idea that somebody would say something and they would never, ever, ever back down on it. In fact, even the idea that you would say something and that those words would bind you, even in our legal tradition, is being undermined. Like even in America, just the way we start like working our court ideas and some of the precedents, just the idea that you could make a promise at one point in your life and then actually be held to that promise at other points in your life later on can just feel just completely unreasonable, right? And the problem is that nobody really wants to believe that either. People want to believe when somebody says, I love you, that signifies something more than that moment. That sentiment will last permanently. Otherwise, like on some level, what good is it, right? I mean, the whole point of love is that you want to tell somebody, and that people would make up marriage when they're in love because what they want to do is signify that it means more than anything could ever mean. They want to make it permanent, right? And so, now, we moderns know that the universe won't last forever, right? We know that in 5 billion years, give or take, that the sun is going to burn up and we'll either have to go intergalactic somewhere else that has a younger sun, or we're not going to be around. And but like for us, for the most part, being a ways back from the singularity, we don't intend to be there, and so that might as well be forever. And so the earth, the land, the sun, the moon, the stars, those things last forever, and human words don't last but a minute, right? And the more hurt we've been, the more that's true. In fact, for a lot of us, the only words that have had any real staying power in our lives are the ones that haunt us. Like the terrible things people have said to you, the terrible things they've predicted for your life, right? Those are the things you remember. Those are the words that have staying power because they can still hurt you right now. And so when Jesus gives this basically his last public teaching in the Gospel of Luke, he makes a claim that in himself, that relationship is forever reversed in his words. If you think of this whole passage and you think, what is the most foundational line, the most foundational idea in the whole passage? It's this. When Jesus says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. When we hear those words, I think it's important for us to recognize that we are not the kinds of creatures, and we have not had the kinds of experiences that would lead us to believe that statement. Right? We are the kinds of creatures that are both limited in our scope and have experienced being let down. We've experienced people telling us stuff they did not live up to. We know people do not live up to their words. And so we do not naturally believe this, right? And it's important to recognize that when Jesus says that heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away, he's not talking about his ethical teachings like love your neighbor. Because you could say something like, well, loving your neighbor as yourself, that's like a universal principle. It's always been true. It'll always be true. It's a fundamental good. It'll never pass away. That's not what Jesus means. Right? Because in this passage, what he actually says is, he says, I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Notice that word, the word happened, meaning he just said a bunch of things are going to happen. And he's like, this generation, whatever generation means in that context, which I'll get into in a little bit, his words are, these people aren't going to stop being a people until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. So Jesus isn't talking about his universal ethical commands. He's talking about the promise about his kingdom that is going to come, what he is going to do in history, which includes his return and all of the providences of God related to that, until he brings in a final and perfect kingdom, like spring finally extinguishing the winter. That winter, the winter of sin and curse, will and must give way. And all of the people of the spring who have lived through that winter will live in that new kingdom. Right? Now, so why does he say that? And it should be pretty straightforward. People tell us things, they promise things that we may not believe. Right? When he says, my words are never going to pass away, what is he telling us we might easily think if we're not careful? That his words have passed away, right? That's what he's trying to prevent. That's what he's trying to help us realize. He's saying, listen, if you believe in the passage of time as these events play out, if you believe what these events playing out signifies is that my words have passed away, like they're not going to happen. You're going to lose your hope and your joy. In that, you're going to lose your confidence. In the loss of your confidence, you're going to lose your capacity to persevere, and you're going to give up. And he says at the end of the passage in verse 34, your hearts will be weighed down into dissipation and anxiety, right? You'll live for the moment, and you'll be full of all the same anxieties of the earth, and you won't have the kind of peace and strength and confidence to persevere. Because essentially in this passage, what Jesus is trying to build is the heart of a martyr. Now, I know in modern times, because the word martyr is sometimes associated with Islamic extremism, that people don't like the word because it has an active, attacking kind of connotation to it. But in the history of Christian faith, because Christians were beat up on for most of their history, especially for the first 500 years, martyr has a willing to die for the truth, to be killed. Not in the act of killing, but in the act of testimony. So within the Christian Bible, the interaction of martyrdom is this: testimony, violence. Right? That I will tell the truth, and then violence will be done to me, and I will never back down. Right? So he says, they'll put their hands on you, they'll take you before kings and rulers, and it says this: the purpose of this is so that you can what? The word is to testify. That is, you're going to be brought before these people so that you can speak the truth. That's what a Christian martyr is. It's somebody who is willing to face any consequence, to bear the identity of Christ, to walk in the way of the cross with him as much as that requires, to be fully faithful in all situations, and to be willing to be open and to speak the truth to whoever is acting upon you. No matter what. And that's important for two reasons. One is, in case you are one of the people where Jesus says, they will kill some of you. Like if you're going to be one of those people and you don't really know if you're going to be one of those people, you need to be ready to go all the way to that extreme, right? But on the other end of things, in some ways for human beings, sometimes it is easier to make the choice to die all at once than to make the choice to die a little bit every single day, in relationship to every temptation to give ourselves over to worldliness or dissipation or anxiety, to lose our hearts to be truly Christ's in the world every moment. And you see, what I think Jesus teaches all through the gospel, right? Because in chapter 9, he said, unless you're willing to take up your cross daily and follow me, you can't be my disciple. Why would he say that, right? What Jesus is essentially arguing is like, unless you have the heart of a martyr, unless you're willing to die right now, kind of, right? Now, I realize that feels extreme, but psychologically speaking, it's not extreme. So remember what Satan says in the second chapter of Job? He says, skin for skin, a man will give everything for their life. Remember him saying, right? So he takes away everything that belongs to Job, and Job is like really hurt by it. And then God's like, you done with him yet? And Satan is like, nope, no. At the bottom, every man, when you threaten their life, they'll do whatever they have to save it. And God goes, all right, you want to test him in that? Go ahead. Test him in that. We'll see if Job is that guy, right? Because here's what Satan knows. He believes that will be true about Job because he knows it's true about human beings generally. When it comes right down to it, when people threaten our well-being, when they threaten our identity, when they threaten our future, when they threaten our ability to move forward in our lives, when they threaten our assets, when they threaten our good name, when they threaten our freedom and our liberties, they know that when that happens to us, we will back down. Skin for skin. A man or a woman will do anything to save their own life. And you see, the only way that won't be true of you is at the heart of you have the heart of a martyr. You're willing to go as far as this goes, right? In another place, Jesus says, look, if anybody was going to build a tower, he would actually stop at the beginning and calculate the entire cost of having a tower, right? He wouldn't say, I'm going to build this 30-foot tower. I got $25 to buy 50 bricks. Let's buy some bricks and we'll see how it goes, right? That's not how you build a tower. You start at the beginning and you realize how much it's going to take to actually get all the way to the end. And what it's really going to cost. And what it's really going to mean. Because otherwise, it's worse to start and fail than to never even start at all. And so in this passage, what Jesus is trying to do is to so set up our hearts with both preparing us for the worst and filling our hearts with unspeakable joy in his promises, that our heart is so settled in those things that we are ready to have confidence and faith and trust and to realize the disciplines of watchfulness that will be necessary for us to make the choices that a martyr must make every single day. Because the choice not to lash out in anger or to not harbor that resentment anymore or to not speak those words about somebody that you should know you don't really understand or whatever the calling of godliness is in a particular moment requires a certain kind of death in us, right? And that dynamic, whether it is the little death of not taking offense, or the little death of letting go of a resentment, or the little death of working hard at what you're supposed to be working on and not seeking to escape it, the little death of spending your life for what it's for rather than what you would please yourself with, all those little deaths, that's the same basic decision as giving yourself over to actual death. That's one of the geniuses of Jesus. We think we can take all the little moments of life lightly. But in many ways and in various times, Jesus is trying to help us realize that's not really true about us. That at every moment, either we are pleasing God and not man, or we are choosing our identity in Christ and not in the world, or we are seeking to be a creature that is spiritual and not just visceral and glandular. We're choosing one thing or the other, one direction or the other, one identity or the other, in every decision, in every thought, at every moment, and in every one, there is a certain version of us that's dying, and in that dying, there's another version of us that is rising to life. Right? And you see, in that sense, the heart of godliness, the heart of Jesus, the heart of knowing Christ, what it means to be a Christian, is at bottom the heart of a martyr. And it can't be taken lighter than that in any age, at any time, in any person. Now, the reason why Jesus tells us this is because he knows that we're going to struggle, like we're going to struggle with 2,000 years later realizing that Jesus' words are never going to pass away, right? And you could think about it this way, because you'd be like, well, it's been 2,000 years, like it's kind of reasonable maybe his words have passed away. Well, maybe, but the amount of time you're waiting on something is somewhat relative to how you think the plan is progressing, right? So like, imagine a couple, they get married, and the woman wants to go to law school at Harvard, but they're from like Southern Indiana, and the husband basically hates Boston, right? And the guy's like, okay, listen, you got in at Harvard, I know you want to go to law school there, let's go, right? And she's like, well, it may take like 4 years, and I might have to be partner there, so this could be like a 7 or 8 year gig. And he's like, okay, if this is your dream though, like, we can make this work, but I don't want to live in Boston forever. She's like, okay, right? So they move to Boston, and like, they're about a year in, and it just doesn't look like she's studying that much, right? And he's like, so how's it going? She's like, I quit the law school thing. And he's like, what? What do you mean? I didn't like it. It's not really why I came. What do you mean it's not why we came? Well, I didn't think you'd respond well, but I wanted to be able to go to more Red Sox games. And so like, I worked really hard to get in at the school, but this is what I'm doing, right? The guy would be understandably, he'd be like, okay, that's not okay. Like, we're moving. Like, I hate this city. Like, we're not doing this, right? After like a year, and she'd be like, oh, wait, you were up for 7 years of this. How come after like a year now you won't do it anymore? He's like, and the answer is what? Because we are no longer progressing toward the goal. That's why, right? That's why. Like, I could do 7 years toward that goal. But the minute you take away the goal, like, I can't do 20 minutes. This is crazy, right? And you see, fundamental to how long it's reasonable to wait on Jesus isn't just specific to the amount of time he hasn't returned yet. The amount of time that he hasn't returned yet is relative to whether or not he is working a plan that is worth working. Because if you have suffered as his image bearer 1 second and he hasn't returned to stop it, relatively speaking, what's the difference between that and your whole life? If he has a reason sufficient to not intervene in the first moment of your suffering, why wouldn't that reason be similarly sufficient to any extended amount of time in which he would wait? If he's got a good enough reason, he's got a good enough reason. And it's probably a lot of reasons, and they're all probably better than you think. Right? And so what Jesus seems to do in this passage is he goes through and he's trying to undo this like series of misunderstandings that human beings have in our worldliness that cause us to believe that the plan that he's working that makes the amount of time reasonable, wrong. Right? Because what happens is temptation comes in and worldliness comes in and says, Jesus isn't working a plan, or what's going on isn't worth it, or what's happening doesn't make sense. And so therefore, waiting 2,000 years, waiting as long as you've waited, struggling through whatever you're struggling through, the reason for waiting through that is insufficient. The plan isn't big enough. It's not a big enough deal. And Jesus is like, don't fall into that lie. Okay, so I'm going to go over 4 things that Jesus tries to say to kind of reset us from our worldliness and reset our focus on what the kingdom of God is really like, so that we can have that heart of a martyr, so we can know that heaven and earth will pass away, but his words will never pass away. And what he promises us is real, and not one hair on your head will perish. And if you stand, you will have life. And the only 2 things worth living for are 1, to grow in discernment, to be ready to escape the things that are coming, and 2, to be ready to stand before the Son of Man when he comes. Okay? So the first thing is that the public record means nothing. Though we act like it means everything. The public record means nothing. Okay? It's surprising how many news shows are called On the Record. It's a lot of them. And it's part of people talk about the New York Times being the paper of record in America, right? Paper of record, because the record matters. Are you speaking on the record, or are you speaking off the record, right? The idea, people have this sense that there's a way to interpret things, right? Lincoln did the right thing in the Emancipation Proclamation, even though it was unconstitutional. That's on the record. Everybody knows that. Lincoln was right? FDR was right to go into World War II. He was right. Right? There's all these things we think about history, we think happened the way they were described. We even think that about our own lives. We tend to think that our version of our own personal histories is what has actually happened in our lives. Right? It's your own personal public record of your life. Other people have thoughts about your life, about what's going on in your life, what's happening in your life. They have their own mental public record of you. Okay, here's what you need to understand. If you believe in Jesus, Jesus says all of that means precisely nothing. Nothing. None of it. It's all trumpery. Now listen, from a human perspective, it's worthwhile for us to write things down and to interpret things, because we have to conceptualize stuff to make decisions, okay? So it's not bad that we have written history and scholars and stuff, right? That's not bad. What's bad is when we think our histories are the history, or when we think our views of our personal history is how God looks at it, or our interpretations of other people or other groups of people are right. it's right. It's just all not, okay, think about it from this perspective. The first 5 verses of chapter 21, right? Everybody's bringing their money to the offerings. There's all these rich people, and they're bringing lots of big amounts of money. And then there's this lady that nobody pays any attention to. And she drops in 2 copper coins, right? And Jesus goes, look. You guys see that? She gave the biggest gift. You see, on the record, all these rich people were coming through, and they're giving their big gifts, and the priests are receiving their big gifts, and oh, isn't that a pretty lamb? Take that up to the front. And, oh, look at that. Oh, Jim, this is such a great anonymous gift you're giving this year. And, all this is kind of going on, right? And meanwhile, there's this, widow who probably smells bad and is short and stuff, and, she doesn't have nice sandals, and she puts in these 2 little copper things. Nobody pays any attention to her. Jesus is like, listen, this is the record, okay? In heaven, the record is Sarah Anderson, 96 years old, gives all she has to live on. That's the record. Don't think you're going to go and stand before the Son of Man and any of the records that you buy into are going to matter at all. None of them are going to matter. Our cultural record isn't going to matter. Our newspapers and video records aren't going to matter. Our YouTube videos aren't going to matter. None of it's going to matter. Even the stuff we have caught on tape isn't going to matter. Because we don't have what happened before that, what happened after that. There's all the kind of stuff we need. None of it's going to matter. God has his own right understanding of every event, every human thought, everything that came before it, everything that came after it, everything that caused everything, every relationship of everything with everything else, everything properly understood in its proper proportion, in absolute perfection, and it is not anything like any of the records any of us know exist. The public record means precisely nothing, even religiously, right? The disciples look at the temple. The temple of Herod was one of the wonders of the ancient world. Not literally in the list they make, but it was better and cooler and bigger and more awesome than 3 or 4 of the 7 great wonders of the ancient world. He spent 30 years building it. He basically bankrupted Israel, building these 3 or 4 things that he wanted to build so amazingly. Masada, the Herodian, and the temple. He built it so that basically 7 million Jews could simultaneously stand on the Temple Mount together. 27, I think, football fields, just of open space, except the Temple Mount isn't that big. So he had to build a false mountain. And then he built this temple with ornate marble that was blue, so that when you walked into the main temple area, it looked like you were walking on the ocean. Josephus said that you couldn't even look at the temple when the sunlight came up over the hills in Jerusalem, because it looked like this bright white light that would burn out your eyes, because the whole thing was covered in gold. Right? And the apostles say, Lord, look at this temple. And then it says this, and all these things dedicated to God. Look at all these things dedicated to God. Which would cause you to believe that God would take them seriously, that God would find them interesting, right? And Jesus says, this means precisely nothing. Precisely nothing. He says, you see this temple, you see how beautiful it is? The day is coming very soon where not one stone is going to be left here. It's all going to be gone. God will wipe away his own temples. You build a temple to God, go ahead. You want to build a religious something in your life? You want to build religion into your life, like your own little temple that you make? All these things in my life are devoted to God. But at the heart is not the heart of a martyr. At the heart is not a heart that's fully devoted to Jesus. At the heart is not a heart that's willing to die every day and take up its cross and follow him. At the heart is not a person counting the cost of the tower to build it. At the heart is something worldly, something else, something not that interested. Something crushed and choked by the anxieties of this world and not able to find any hope or joy in Christ himself. And you build all that temple around it. It means precisely nothing. Okay? And so one of the things Jesus wants to remind us over and over and over again is listen to me. God promised that in all the places of the whole earth, he would give his special presence in one place, the Jewish tabernacle. He's like, though the whole earth is mine, I will put my special presence in this one place. Listen to me. If he is willing to wipe that place out twice, you tell me that he's invested in anything but the truth. He's not. He's invested in real faith, actual redemption, true transformation, the actual rejuvenation of the heart to really believe in him. The public record, no matter what we think it is, means precisely nothing, okay? Secondly is, we tend to take the wrong things from his instructions, especially when they're prophetic, okay? So this whole section is essentially prophecy, right? And so when we hear prophecy, what that tends to make people want to see is like, oh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Right? And so in my Christian ministry, so I've been doing ministry to adults for 20 years now, and one of the things that I've noticed is that anytime that I'm willing to teach on prophecy, people are willing to show up. And so I'm kind of bigoted in lots of ways like you are. And so one of my beliefs about that was like more fundamentalist people or less educated people will turn up for prophecy stuff, right? And I found out that's not really true. Like I came to Madison, like we have a thing on prophecy and like the whole room is packed, right? Like I don't think it's really educational level or something. It's like, we just want the dirt, man. Like it's exciting. What's going to happen? When's it going to happen? How's it going to, right? And so when Jesus says that the whole temple is going to be destroyed, the question the apostles say is when? When is this going to happen? And do you know what Jesus' response is? This is in verse 7. Teacher, they asked, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they're about to take place? Right? Here's Jesus' response. Verse 8. He replied, watch out that you are not deceived. See that? They're like, okay, Jesus, tell us the stuff. And he's like, listen. Here's what you need to realize. Watch out or you'll be deceived. You see, Jesus is trying to give them instructions about how to live in a world with an enormous amount of uncertainty. So you can think about it this way. Prophecy includes just enough about the future so we can reckon with its truth somehow. So if you go back to the book of Isaiah, for example, where Isaiah is like prophesying about the future. He's prophesying about the future to give people in the present hope so that they'll choose God by faith and they'll pursue godliness by the Spirit in the moment of their present lives. So that whatever is told about the future is told in positive terms. He's like, look, good things are going to happen, right? But they're intentionally vague so that they're hard to interpret and lock down. But they're told so that in the present, we would know what to do. Because what do human beings do if they know what's going to happen in the future? Just think about the last time travel movie you saw. If you're human and you know what's going to happen in the future, what do you try to do? You try to change it, right? You try to stop it, or you try to change it, or you try to make it better. You try to game the system. But if you just know something is going to happen in the future, if you respond now to the truth you are being called to, right? You don't know enough about the future to game it. You only know that if you respond to the truth in the present, God will work that future thing that he knows the details of that you don't know the details of. You see, part of prophecy is you're not supposed to be able to really figure out exactly what's going to happen. You understand? You're never supposed to be able to figure it out. You're supposed to be able to know enough and figure out enough to be faced with the truths and the teachings that you're being given so that you can respond in the present. Do you understand? So you can think about it this way. Prophecy produces wisdom if you think, how can I be prepared to live better in a life with unknowns? So Jesus is like, listen, you guys, a lot of stuff is going to happen. A lot of crazy stuff. There's going to be famines and pestilence and wars and crazy judges and police and stuff and the things are going to, things in the heavens are going to ultimately, all kinds of crazy stuff is going to happen. What's the point of that? Be like, well, how much crazy stuff and when's the moon going to look like this? That's not the point. The point is things are going to get nuts. That's the point. Okay? So what, you're like, well, what do you mean? Things are gonna, I don't know what's going to get nuts. It's just going to get nuts. So then what do? You get ready for things to get nuts. That's what you do. Right? If I'm listen, things are going to get nuts. In the next 12 years, things are going to get nuts. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to get nuts, right? You'd be like, maybe I should buy some food and put it in my basement. Maybe I should get in shape physically. Maybe I should figure out which of my bro friends know how to do stuff. Maybe I should learn how to fix something. Maybe I should, you'd be like, maybe I should get ready somehow, right? Because things are going to get nuts. If you don't think things are going to nuts, you'd be like, let's play some more video games. It'll be fine. Where are the nachos? So, the heart of gossip, or I just want to know more, is, right, you're like, well, what could happen if all these unknowns, and who's going to do it, and when's it going to happen, how's it going to blah, blah, blah. So the temple's going to be destroyed. Well, when, Jesus, and who's going to do it, and how's it going to happen, what's going to, and when, now we're going to, and Jesus is like, you guys, that's not the point, right? You could just imagine if he told all the specifics, right? He'd be like, Peter, you're already going to be dead when it happens, so I don't even know why you're asking me this. Almost all these guys, all the apostles, almost all of them are going to be dead by the time it happens. Right? That's not the point. The point is that you have to prepare yourself. So he says, listen, you need to watch yourself. You need to, right? And so if you go through the imperatives in this passage, one is you need to watch out. You need to become discerning, right? If you go to verse 34, it says, be careful, or your hearts will be weighed down. We'll get to that in a little bit here in just a minute. And then verse 36, he says, be always on watch and pray that you'll be able to escape all that's about to happen and that you may be able to stand before the Son of Man, right? So the imperative here is, he's saying, listen, you need to know this stuff is going to happen for two main reasons. One is so that you can watch your heart. So you can watch your heart. Because otherwise your heart is going to lose courage. And one of the most important things that you can do is to watch over your heart in terms of thankfulness and joy and hope so that you don't lose courage, because life is full of difficult decisions and you're going to have to die every moment of every day. And therefore, you're going to require an unlimited amount of courage. Okay? And in order for that to happen, you better watch your heart. And two, you need to know how to watch out for stuff. If you know not everybody's going to love you, you realize that. There are ways that you'll be discerning and you may be careful or you may do things. In fact, in one of the Gospels, Jesus says, in a more expanded verse, he says, listen, when they persecute you in one place, flee to another place. So, for example, there are Christians all over the world. For example, it is a tragedy that only 2% of the population of Syria is Christian now. That's a tragedy. And there's probably Christians here who are it'd be great if they stayed in Syria so they could be a witness for Jesus. Whatever. No, Jesus told them. He told them that if they got persecuted in one place, they were allowed to flee somewhere else. Right? That's real. And there are Christians from Iraq and Syria and all places in the world, from all different times of the world, that took Jesus' advice. And they were we are getting out of Dodge, man. And so one of the first examples is the destruction of Jerusalem. Jesus says, listen, when you see armies surround Jerusalem, you need to understand that the time of Jerusalem's desolation has come. Right? That's not destruction. The word desolation is much worse than the word destruction. It means there will be nothing left. He's you should leave if you're there, and if you're in the countryside, do not go in. In 70 AD, there was a revolt of the Jewish kingdoms, and they revolted against Rome, and Rome sent armies, and they really came, and there was a real possibility that Jerusalem could hold out a siege. They had enough soldiers, they had a big enough wall, they had enough food, and they had an internal water supply. It was not sure at all that the Romans could beat them. And they had beaten the Romans in some places. The problem is that the time of their desolation had come. And so the Christians fled the city of Jerusalem. They didn't go in. At that Passover, when all the Jewish people came in, and then Titus closed the noose around the city, almost all the Christians were gone. Because they had listened to Jesus. They were okay, this looks like there's armies gathering around Jerusalem. I think Jesus said we're supposed to get out of here. And they did. And the Jewish nation had 3 different factions, and 2 different people claimed to be the Messiah, and they fought with each other, and they didn't surrender when they should have, and over, all these things worked against them until Titus destroyed the city, and he destroyed everything, and he destroyed the entire temple, and not one stone was left of it. Right? They were able to discern the times, and they did something about it, right? But that's the only explicit, specific prophecy in this passage. The rest are fairly general, and we're going to have to discern what to do. Does that make sense? Okay. So if you go through this passage and you pay attention to the teachings, not just to the prophecies, right? Jesus says all these things. You guys, a lot is going to happen, so don't let it confuse you. 2, you're going to be persecuted. Don't think you're not going to be persecuted. You are going to be persecuted. 3, one purpose of this is for you to be a witness, right? Which means when you start to receive pressure, right? Passive oppression, persecution, if it causes you to shut up about your faith. Do you see what's happening here? We're not actually doing what we're supposed to do. The point of persecution is that we'll be put in places where we're supposed to be a witness no matter what happens to us, right? And then you don't have to have the perfect words. Don't worry about what you're going to say, right? And then be ready for very profane mistreatment and be ready for very close betrayals. It says parents will betray you, sisters and brothers, very close friends. Right? You need to realize that there can't be a betrayal too close for you so that you lose your faith in Jesus. Do you understand? There is no one too close to you that if they were to betray you, that would be too close. That's how settled and ordered your heart has to be. Right? Jesus says, everyone. Now, hopefully this is a maximalist euphemism, but this is what you need to prepare your heart for. That up to everyone may hate you because of Jesus. And the reason he says because of him is so that you'll realize that, listen, there's all kinds of idiosyncrasies about us. When people hate you because you believe in Jesus, they will say it's for something else. They won't say, well, it's because you're a Christian. Especially in America right now, because bigotry is uncool. If it's wide open, you have to say it's something else, right? And so they'll say it's the sexual ethic of Christianity, or they'll say that it's some kind of belief that we hold, or something that we know, biblically speaking, in terms of the teaching of Jesus, is a non-negotiable. And to get rid of that, we might as well get rid of Jesus, right? But they'll say it's that thing. But Jesus is saying, they'll say it's that thing. But you need to know, he's saying, I'm saying, whatever the public record is, which means nothing, my record is they hate you because of me. Okay? Now, listen, there are all kinds of ways as Christians we can be dumb and we can do stupid things and behave in ways we shouldn't, and people hate us because of us. That's real, okay? But there's a certain extent to which you've got to adjudicate in your own heart what is, I really could do this better and be more winsome, and what is, I need to stop letting them blame the victim. They're attacking me and being unreasonable, and they are persecuting me, and I need to say that's what it is. Without being a crybaby about it. Does that make sense? And then Jesus says, listen, what you need to know is not one hair on your head will perish. It is in standing firm that you will have life, and you need to live in a way so that you will stand before the Son of Man. That when the Son of Man comes, that your response will be to lift up your head and you'll be like, my redemption is finally here. The winter has finally broken. The leaves are coming out of the trees. Spring has come. I can feel it in the air. That 50-degree day has happened. This is the moment I've been waiting for. At the specific moment when other people will say, what's happening? This is terrible. I can't believe this is happening. That will come upon you as not, oh no, I wasn't ready for this. Or I lost heart. Or my courage left me years ago and I'm really, what will happen is you'll say, I've been waiting for this moment. Okay, sorry. 3, that should be 3, okay? And there's only a couple minutes left here, so don't think we're halfway through. God's plan is complicated, okay? So if you just think that God's plan is Jewish nation, Jesus comes, people are coming to Jesus, Jesus returns, and then the kingdom of God, that's the plan, okay? In the broadest possible strokes, that's the plan. That's like FDR saying in World War II, he's okay, listen, we're going to get to Berlin. Okay, it's a little simplistic, right? That's not a lot. It's not filled out. There's a lot of details missing, okay? And so what Jesus is listen, Jerusalem's going to get destroyed and it's going to be trampled on until the times of the Gentiles are over. And then these wars, they all have to happen. And this is going to, right? And you're that sounds like a very complicated plan. It is a very complicated plan. Jesus isn't just it's not like Jesus is sitting in heaven and he's well, We've got another 1,426 years, 300, like in 47 minutes and 20 seconds. Till I come back, that's the time of the Gentiles. And then I'm coming back and whoever's saved is saved. That's not what's happening. God is through his Spirit and through his power and through his providence working in all of the things that are happening in the world for his own purposes. Revealing human hearts and assuring damnation and bringing about salvation and turning justice this way, moving this that way, and for his own reasons, for his own purposes that he has not shared with us. We know our part in the plan. We don't know the plan. Right? It's like some huge offensive in that your officer's like, okay, this is what we are doing. And then you think like, because that's what you're doing, that's all that's happening. It's not all that's happening. It's a tiny little thing. And all these things coordinate under the sovereignty of the general to make the whole thing happen. And every war and every pestilence and every news story and everything is all being worked by a sovereign God for his own purposes that we do not understand. Okay? And our job is to know our part and to not confuse our part with the plan. Because if you confuse your part with the plan, especially if you're worldly and you don't like your part in the plan, being a witness, right? Then there's no way you'll believe that the plan is worth this kind of waiting. Do you understand? You'll feel like the plan is like going to Red Sox games and this is stupid. And I hate Boston, right? You won't get that you're part of a dream that's much more important, that's much longer, that's much more complete, right? And then lastly, that the end is going to be really clear and decisive. Like Jesus claims that he is going to globally, perfectly, and singly return at a moment in time and to fully bring about his kingdom in the end. And that is one of the promises. When he says, my words will never pass away, he's talking about that. He's not talking about love your neighbor, though love your neighbor will still be true. He's saying, I will return, and that promise that I will return and that you will find life and not one hair of your head will be lost and that you will stand before the Son of Man and that it will be like spring breaking through winter and your eternity will be at hand and that will be good. Those words can never pass away. Right? And Jesus says the singular reason you need to understand those four things is so that you will not misunderstand that the plan is not worth the time, and therefore that Jesus' words must have passed away so that you lose your hope. Jesus wants us simultaneously to be absolutely prepared for the worst, to have the heart of a martyr, and to be absolutely ready to attain glory, which is also the heart of a martyr. Martyrs aren't driven by their desire to bleed. They're driven by the weight of the hope of a glory that fills their hearts. So that they're willing to stand before people who would kill them and to tell them not about the sin that person will commit against them, but about the hope that they could have. That through testifying to the truth, that's what the word martyro in Greek means. The word martyr means witness. It doesn't mean death. It means one willing to speak the truth and to live the truth and to invite our enemies, to invite our neighbors, to invite everybody to the greater end so that they would rejoice at the coming of the Son of Man. And whether that is 10 years from now or whether it's 20,000 years from now and we're still in the first generations of the early church, I don't know. But what I do know is that Jesus is trying to prepare us to have the heart with the joy and the hope that will have the courage for perseverance, and not just to make it and survive, but to survive even in whatever kind of desolation we have to face, that inside of us we would experience what Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians, that we would be renewed day by day, that in us is joy and hope, and that we would be like John and Peter, that when they rejoiced because they were counted worthy to be beaten for the name of Jesus. You have a heart like that and you have lots of good days, man. Lots of good days. Father, as we try to take seriously this, your last public teaching in Luke's gospel, help us to put our hope and our trust in the fact that heaven and earth will pass away before your words will pass away. Help us to actually believe that no matter what could ever be done to us, in your hands, not a single hair on our head can finally perish. That every action in the world, everything that goes on, you are working a greater plan that is ultimately for your own glory, and you have promised to include us in this thing you call your kingdom. And that we can learn to see with discernment. And that even though you want to prepare us with hard truths for the worst, all of this is about joy. All of this is about the joy that is to come and the hope of glory that we will see and the promises that you've made, and that it is worth it to you, not only for you to suffer yourself, but to even let your beloved suffer, that we would speak the truth to those who are around us, that everybody that we would naturally count an enemy, that they would become brothers and sisters, that not everyone will hate us or because of you, but that many people would come to love you because of you, and that they would become our brothers and sisters. We pray that you'd use us in that thing you have called us to, that we would look like you in the world, and that we would be a community that shows this creation what it means to know, love, follow, and belong to you. Help us to be people of courage, and because of courage, perseverance. In Jesus' name, amen.